Hello, and welcome back to the Queer Theology Podcast. Almost Happy New Year, December 31st. I feel like we can call it. It's the year is done.
Or Happy
2023
New
is
Year's
done.
Eve.
Yes. So today we're going to talk about a bunch of different things, but the kind of overarching thing is spiritual practices, our favorite things about queer and trans faith, and also how we kind of came to the spiritual practices that we have, what we love, all of those good things. Anyone who has spent any time around my social media or me knows that I am a giant nerd when it comes to planning and goal setting in particular, and not in a hustle culture, get more done kind of way, but I really think that there's something beautiful about planning in that it helps me to be really intentional about how I'm spending my time and what I'm spending time on, and making sure that I have time for the things that are most important to me. And so I really love this time of year, not in a new year, new you kind of way, but in a way for me to reflect on, did I actually make time for the things that I care about last year? What might I want to tweak and change and grow into as we enter a new year? There's something about the turning of a new year that just brings some reflection time for me, and so I'm excited to dive into this topic. So, Brian, for you, um, let's start with what are your rituals around the changing of the year? And those can be spiritual rituals, but also sexual, relational, all of the things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just so excited to be talking about queer and trans faith and the practices that support that, because I just love being a person of faith. I was thinking about it this morning as I was doing the dishes. And what is fascinating to me or to some people is that I think that by some definitions of the word, I might be considered an atheist, but I think about and talk about God constantly, and I feel like God is really important and faith is really important to me and to other people, and I'm just not particularly hung up on if you believe, quote unquote, the same things I do, or if you practice in the same ways that I do, but I just want every person to be connected to the infinite power of possibility, and to be plugged into community, and to know your values and to live those out. And I don't know, the world is sometimes I don't even have a word for it, just that sound effect. The world is sometimes, and I think that believing that a better world is possible and then working to change that and to make it so is so vital. And I don't, it's I believe in the impossible, but then I also feel I watch the impossible become possible. I mean, just in my lifetime, when I started to realize that I was queer when I was 12, 13, 14, gay marriage being a thing nationwide and in many parts around the world, and polyamory starting to get mainstream acceptance, and that I could be living the life that I live just beyond my wildest imagination, right? And I think that it's because people who came before me and people of my generation and people after me believed in the impossible. And I think faith practices help us to remind us that the impossible is possible, when it is hard to do. And so around, specifically around your question around the changing of the seasons and the changing of the year, I think I am really sort of anti diet culture, hustle culture, there's something wrong with you, change all the things at once. And so I tend to you shy away from resolutions, especially ones anchored in restricting foods or punishing yourself at the gym or whatever. But I have found over the years that like just sort of like skating into the new year as if it's like a new day, also like this, like a, just like a regular old day doesn't also doesn't feel good. And so I try to have some intentions. Like some years those have been just like one word of the year. Some years that's been like a handful of like big picture, like things I want to get out of the year, like read 12 books or 20 books this year, or spend more time like praying and meditating, or last year or like a few years ago I was like, I really want to like get more connected to like an in-person community here in Los Angeles. And so like having some like intentions, I guess you could call them goals, but they don't it's not like increase my revenue by 20% or like save X amount of money for retirement. It's, oh my God. Ugh. One day I'll max out my like my Roth IRA, but it is not this year. Right. But like, so some intentions. And I think that like our culture tells us to prioritize like financial based goals and like body based goals. And I'm like, so I'm like not really interested in either of those. I think about like, what do I want out of like friendship, out of community, out of like my own relationship to my body, out of like my sex life. And I mean that like broadly, like my sex life with other people, but also my sex life with myself. How can I live more deeply and more fully and more passionately into my values? Like those are some things that I think about at this time of year. And I would also add that I think that for me at least, like 12 months feels like I can't wrap my mind around that. And so I try to check in with those like a few times throughout the year. Like I'm a spiritual person, so like the end of the like Gregorian calendar year like is a good time, but also I have found around like Lent, Easter, Passover to be a helpful time. Around like the fall, like the changing seasons, if you're in school, like start of the school year, if you have seasonal affective disorder like me, like as like your summer high is starting to end and the winter scares are starting to come, like how can I like prepare for the coming winter seasons? And so I feel like for me, there's like 3 times a year that I'm trying to check in with myself and like, how's it going? How am I living into my values? How am I connecting to other people? How am I feeding myself creatively? How am I like, I think I already said this, but like engaging with my community, but I think I mean that in 2 ways. Like, how am I like engaging with my friends? And then also like, how am I engaging with my like community of like the people that I live around and the place that I live in, even if they're not necessarily like friends of mine. And also all of that sort of like feels important. And for me, having some like rituals, habits, practices helps me to like stay on track with those. What about you?
Yeah, I think, well, there's a couple things that I want to pull out from what you said, because I think that sometimes we have this idea that spiritual practices or spiritual resolutions or goals or whatever are like prayer, meditation, Bible reading, spiritual reading, going on retreats,
yeah.
right? And I think that the way that you're talking about it is, how am I living in line with my values, is really important, because I think that then spirituality doesn't become like this thing that we do over on the side. It becomes integrated into everything we do.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, my spiritual life is, yes, prayer, meditation, going to church, being in religious community, but it's also like, how am I voting? How am I treating my friends? How am I treating my partner? How am I, buying things with intention and values, right? It's all of those things. And so I think that is really important.
Yeah, a few years ago, I started thinking about like masturbation as a spiritual practice, and that just like changed my world for me, right? And it's all of it, right? It's not just what you were saying, these like very stereotypical spiritual practices.
Yeah, and it's embodied too, right? Like it's not just the things that we're doing around like belief or head stuff. It's how are we in our bodies and with our bodies with other people, and also like it's not just what I do alone, right? It's what I do in community that I think is really important. And I think the other piece that is important for me, and this reflects in my own practice of like, you do need a plan. And I say this not just as someone who loves planning, but like there is something. There was a lot of years in my life where I didn't bother to plan anything, and I didn't set intentions because it just felt so pointless. Both because like I felt like I always failed, and so why bother and why set myself up for failure and disappointment, but also because I didn't feel like I had any power or agency in my own life, right? Like I'm thinking particularly of a time when I was working multiple jobs. Every single penny was accounted for. I had nothing to spare. I didn't even have my own transportation. So I was at the reliance on the city bus system, which in Minneapolis is like not good. Um, and I just remember this sense of like I just like why plan anything because I don't actually have control over
Mm-hmm.
anything in my life. And it wasn't until I started to be like, okay, yes, I don't actually have control over everything in my life, but I occasionally have a day off, or I have a couple of hours at night before I go to bed, or I've got time on the bus. How do I want to be spending that time? That really turned a corner for me, and it was taking control over the little things that I did have in my control that then helped me envision, oh, there's actually a lot of things that I have control over. And if I don't like my life, I actually can start to put things into motion and change it. And yes, it's not going to happen overnight, but it can happen eventually. And I think it was those little things that helped me to start to put practices into place, right? That actually helped me to care for my spirit, that helped me to care for my body, that didn't leave me feeling like, ugh, everything is just out of my control and I have no power. And that actually did feel like a deeply spiritual thing of like, how can I start to live into my values, even when I'm working a crushing job on capitalism, even when I like don't have a ton of in-person community, even when. And so I think that for me, this sense of really taking time to say, what do I want to focus on? How do I want to spend the time that I have? What are my values right now? And how am I living into those? And where are the places that I'm not living into my values that I want to shift or change? That feels really vital to me. And so I do like to touch in with that around this time of the year. I'm also thinking a lot about like, what do I want to create this year? And a lot of that is art, but it's also like, what experiences do I want to create? What stories do I feel like I want to tell? And what form are those stories taking? Which are both, for me, often theological, but also relational and communal. And then I'm also thinking a lot about, I always make a goal for how many books I want to read. It's always the same goal. Uh,
It's too
but
many.
from
It's an unfathomable amount.
I've hit it every year.
I know.
But for me, but it is like, I went to seminary. I've been in the church my entire life. And also I feel like I still have so much more to learn about the Bible, about theology, and about faith. And so like, those are things that are on my list of like, what are the new things that I want to learn this year? And sometimes it's like, I want to dive into this particular book or books of the Bible and really like read a bunch of thinkers on those. Sometimes it's like, I want to learn about a practice. So for me, I'm thinking a lot about um, prisons right now, prisons and the incarceration system. And so it's both thinking theologically about abolition, but also, if that's like the dream, what are the immediate things we can do right now to support people that are incarcerated, even as we work toward a larger dream? And I think that to me is also planning, right? We're working towards something big and what feels impossible, and that has all of these questions that we maybe don't have answers for. And also, we don't have to let that stop us from starting. We can start right now with like, how can I be a pen pal? How can
Mm-hmm.
I get more resources to someone who's on the inside? How can I be a friend? How can I be in solidarity as I'm also doing this other work that is like bigger and bolder and feels murkier, right? And I think that that's why I love planning so much, because it's not just about what am I doing today? It's like, how am I preparing for the world that is to come by starting today on this thing?
Yeah, in my work as a relationship coach and also as like a spiritual practices coach inside of Sanctuary Collective and Spiritual Study Hall, I want a thing that I see happen over and over again is that, and this is certainly my case in my own life too, is that when there are things that are like not working for me or not working for us or like that we want to change, they often feel big, right? Like if I'm like, I don't know, feeling disconnected from my partner, or I like want to be having more sex with my partner, or I'm feeling disconnected from God, or I'm like thinking about like the prison system in the US and abolition. It's like, I think that it is understandable that our default is our mind goes to like, there's this big problem. And so like, there must be like a big solution. If I like am uncomfortable in my like faith as a queer person, like, it must be this like big project to overhaul it.
Yeah.
And what I found is that like almost always it's like really small, simple stuff. And like, over time that adds up. So it's like if you want to feel connected, more connected to your partner, the solution is like not plan a trip to Paris. The solution is like go on a walk around the block every other night with your partner and like hold his or her or their hand, right? Like if you're like concerned about prison abolition, like you were saying, Shay, like we're not going to like solve that overnight, but like you can start by becoming a pen pal through like Black and Pink or reading a book or attending a lecture, right? It's these little things add up. If you are like wanting to feel more connection to the divine, it might be like reading a book. It might be like starting to meditate once a day. It might be starting to like do a small, simple prayer every day. And that starts to get you like more and more practice and more like data of like, oh, I can do this thing. These are reminders of like who I am and what I value and how I am in the world. And like both like those little things are meaningful in and of themselves and will create massive shifts in you. Like even if all you ever did was like be a pen pal or like say the Lord's Prayer every morning, like that's going to change you. And also more often than not, those things will then like lead you to like the next step on the journey.
And I think it's important to point out what you were just saying. It also goes for like starting a new spiritual practice, right?
Yeah.
Like if you want to start meditating, like setting your goal as 2 hours a day is like not the
Terrible.
way to go. Like that is, you are going to fail. And then, and so like setting a goal of 2 minutes a day, and same thing with the journaling practice, right? 5 lines a day, 5 minutes, whatever that is, that allows you to start and to see the benefit, and it feels sustainable. I think that so often with big life changes, we jump into something and then we're like, this just doesn't feel sustainable. I'm overwhelmed. I don't have time. And so then instead of like cutting back to a reasonable amount, we just stop entirely. And I say this as someone who has done this with writing practices, with journaling practices, with like over and over and over again, right? I remember really distinctly, I would not pick up my journal for months and months and months. And then I would pick it up and I would write for an hour. And then I would tell myself, well, like, this isn't sustainable. I can't write for an hour every day. And it's like, buddy, no one asked you to write for an hour every day. You just needed to like open it and write something every day. And then you wouldn't feel like you had an hour of stuff to catch up on every time you opened your journal. Like, this is a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
Anyway, so like start whatever you think, whatever you're thinking about starting, start smaller than you think you need to and build up over time. Like that is the best way to start a new practice. And so I want to ask, Brian, like, what are some of your current favorite spiritual practices, and why?
Yeah, so I have two that I'm like really jamming on these days. The first one is the one that I've been doing longer, which is praying every day, which like as you probably know, I'm Jewish now, and so there's like a standard like 3 times a day prayer that I usually only end up doing once a day. And I'm really into that. And I want to talk about like sort of like Christian connection there in a second, but it's like not surprising to me. This has been like a recurring theme. I remember like when I first moved to New York City, I had like taken a break from Christianity in college. I was like, had this like really powerful experience in activism where I like saw the impossible become possible, and I like experienced like the spirit moving, and I felt like I wanted to get like re-engaged with spirituality. And my first year being involved with the collegiate church in New York, I like observed Lent, and as part of that, I would often on my lunch break go to a local church and just sort of like read the prophets or read some psalms. And I ended up reading like a lot of the same ones over and over again every day. And that practice of like doing something daily really stuck with me. I like would later go on to when I was like working with Shane Claiborne at The Simple Way, like he gifted me a like the daily office by this Northumbria community that I would, go through the sort of cycle of that. And like that sort of the same thing over and over again was really powerful to me. This is a thing in like most religious traditions. There's like some text or a set of texts that like repeat on a like daily or weekly cycle. And I just think that that is like so powerful, and that like it invites you to find something new again and again and again. And sometimes it's like really meaningful and beautiful, and I have this like transcendent experience. And sometimes it's like words on the page, but I do it anyways. But there's even something like meaningful about like just going through the words on the page, like to do it because like you've committed to showing up to like to be part of this community, to be part of this practice. And so like as a coach, I like my style is generally like it's very client led and like what works for you and figuring out your values. And so I'm gonna like take off my coaching hat for a second and put on the like tell you what to do hat. And I just think that like if you are wanting to like get more in touch with the divine, if you're a Christian, I think that if I could just like invite you to do a experiment for like the next 30 days of just like saying the Lord's Prayer like once a day and like paying attention to like the words and the phrases and like what those mean to you, what those like might mean to other people. I think that like and to like be aware of all the other people around the world that are also saying this prayer. I think that there's like something really powerful. I was part of the Amidah, the sort of like main part of the Jewish prayer. There's this series of like requests of God. And one of them is, I'll say it in English, is forgive us for we have sinned, pardon us for we have transgressed, for you pardon and forgive. Blessed are you, Adonai, abounding in forgiveness. And I was like thinking about like, oh yeah, like there's like something there about like every single day, like reminding myself that like, I'm going to mess. I mean, first, like sin, I'm not triggered by that word, but like, if that is a triggering word for you, like, forgive us for we have like messed up, for we have hurt people, right? Like, pardoned us for like we have transgressed, we have like not, we have like done things and failed to do things to like make this world a better place because you pardon and forgive, because like forgiveness is always there for us. There's like nothing that you can do that puts you outside of like the bounds of forgiveness. When in the Lord's Prayer, there's like, give us our daily bread, right? Like cancel our debts. We're going to cancel each other's debts. There's just like some real richness there about like some key foundational values. And so if it's not the Lord's Prayer, like finding some other prayer or a psalm that is meaningful to you to repeat over and over again. I just picked the Lord's Prayer because it's like easy to find online and all the Christians are doing it. And I didn't want to complicate it by being like, find a prayer. Because if you make it too complicated, if you have to pick a psalm to read over and over again or pick a prayer to read, like it's just too much work, right? So like start with something simple and just like go from there. Over this past spring, as part of, I think it was Lent, we had like a few times a week within Sanctuary Collective, we had like a mindfulness minute and we would meet. And there was like a few things that we did where we like shared prayer requests. If someone had died recently or it was an anniversary of a death, someone, we like remember them. And there was also this section where some of us would read the Lord's Prayer. Some of us would read like a Catholic liturgy. Some of us would read Psalms and prophets. And it was like the same thing twice a week over and over again. And it was a really powerful time for folks to sort of like sit with those texts over and over again and to like know that we are like sitting with them collectively. And so I think that like, and that 30 seconds, right? This is not a 20-minute quiet time. This is not an hour-long lecture. This is like rattle it off in 15 seconds, right? And just like see what that does. And then the other practice that I've been getting into recently is also like a Jewish practice. There's like a fringe garment called tzitzit that you sort of like wear under your clothes every day. And I'm connecting this to like, I'm remembering in our Queerness Everyday Challenge earlier this year, one of the things that we do is to come up with something that you can like wear or carry on you that like reminds you of your like queerness and the divinity and the intersections of those two. And I had always thought of that as something that like, I don't know, I did in the past when I felt like I like needed it more. And now that I feel like more solid in my like queer spiritualness, I like didn't need, I think I was thinking of that as like an aid. And I've been sort of like getting back into that. And I'm also, so it's that, and I've been it's not in every practice, but I've been wearing like jock straps more often and thinking of that as a spiritual practice as well, which is like maybe a little too racy for this podcast. But like I think like this is a thing that lots of like queer men do, right? Like wear jock straps all the time, or to sex parties or like hookups. But like there's something there about like the clothes that I put on my body that are underneath the clothes that everyone sees, whether it's this like tzitzit or whether it's a jock strap, it is sort of this like reminder of like that I am a sexual person, that I am a spiritual person, that these are like good parts of me, that how I use my body is part of my spiritual life. And so like physical objects are another part of my spiritual practice that I've been sort of like really leaning into and jiving with these days.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I mean, I think I talk all the time about how journaling is one of my biggest spiritual practices that doesn't seem on the surface very spiritual, but there is something I think really important to me about being able to have some time to reflect and to be intentional, and to dream, right? To dream in a place that's not going to be judged, where I can dream about whatever it is, whatever the future is going to be. And I think to me that also ties into the other thing that I'm thinking a lot about these days is like how do we both connect to the movements and the people that have come before and also continue their work into the future. And to me that both feels like a very spiritual religious endeavor and also a very queer and trans endeavor.
Mm-hmm.
And I think especially now, I'm feeling especially now that there is more fractures and disconnects and ruptures between generations, than ever before. And it feels new to me. This doesn't feel like a, I don't know, old guy being crabby about the people who are coming after. Like it feels like there is something in the zeitgeist about how culture is moving so quickly, about how information is being transmitted, about how I think how we have both more access than ever before to queer and trans stories, and also they're under attack in new ways, and also because they're so ubiquitous that we don't have to search for them in the ways that we used to. I don't know, there's something there for me, and so I'm trying to be really intentional about going after and looking at the voices of particularly my trans ancestors, but not just trans folks, but like queer history and movements, and also then talking about how those are influencing me and what they're helping me to dream into and live into for the future. And it's the same with like looking at how might this scripture text have been understood in the time when it was written and spoken. How has it been used over centuries of time? How are we using it today to dream into the future? And I think that for me, one of the my favorite things of being trans is to be connected to this lineage, right? This connected to this lineage of people who often society has not wanted to exist, and whom we have said over and over again, we're here and we're going to continue to survive, and to not just survive, but to thrive and to take care of one another. And that also calls me into this Christian lineage and tradition of radical resistance and threat to empire, right? Like my queerness and my transness and my Christianity are like, it's all the same. Like we're all a threat to the powers that be, and we're all trying to dream into a new and better world that is centered on those who are on the margins. And I think that my queerness and my transness always calls me back to the heart of my faith, and that my faith would be radically different if it wasn't anchored in my queerness. And I'm so thankful for that, and I'm continually like looking for, how do I lean into those practices? How do I lean into connecting those things and making that intelligible to other folks so that they can do that work for themselves as well. Like that feels like a really important practice for me.
Yeah, so as we head into the new year, we would love to hear from you what you want out of queer faith in the year ahead. If you're listening to this on the day that it comes out, pop over to our Instagram. We're going to put a little like question thing in our Instagram story so that you can share your sort of like queer spiritual intention for the year ahead. And if you are this, like, if this idea of ritual is driving with you and you like are wanting to get started with that and you want some support and guidance in that, we have a workshop all about understanding Christian ritual, but also crafting your own queer spiritual rituals that are uniquely yours, that support and sustain you, that are sources of resilience and resistance and rest and connection inside of your life. That is available inside a spiritual study hall. You can learn more about this particular workshop at queertheology.com/rituals and get signed up. And with that, like, Happy New Year, and we will see you in 2024.
Happy New Year, y'all.